Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Theodore Latsis. Welcome to our workshop on how to protect your stuff in 3 easy steps. Hopefully you'll find this morning informative. You'll learn a few things. Hopefully I'll entertain you as well. And those of you on Zoom, hopefully you can hear me. And we are recording this, so please be aware. The recording will be available on Zoom after the fact. You will receive an email if you did record or register for the Zoom link, so you will be able to watch it later as well. So let's get started. So what is today's agenda? We're going to go over the handout material. Those of you on Zoom, you will receive some material via email once this is concluded. We're going to go over my background and why I do this. We're going to identify what you know and what you want to know, and get ready to ask questions if you have questions. And we're going to discover the 3 steps to plan and protect your estate, how to make sure that your estate is protected for you and your beneficiaries, and then close with an action plan, hopefully for everyone here. Your handout materials have a bunch of things in them. The most important thing for us is the evaluation, which you'll see on the the left-hand side of your packet. Please, I do listen to those evaluations. I do value the opinions that are expressed. It gives me an opportunity to understand what we are highlighting and what people are understanding and what people may want to learn in future workshops. There's some information about future workshops in here, some information about our firm and the team that we work with here at the Latsis Law Firm. And there's also a page for notes, and there's pens with your packets as well. So if you want to take notes during the presentation, you're more than welcome to do so, and I encourage that, okay? So in the paperwork that you have, I'd like some information about you, whether you're married, whether it's a second marriage or you're divorced, widowed, if you have kids, things like that, and what your concerns are, okay? So a little bit about me, right? So I've been practicing law for 27 years. This location has been my sole location as an attorney. My entire life, I grew up in this building. The building you're sitting in right now used to be a grocery store that my parents owned. I lived upstairs. We all lived upstairs until we moved to the Georgetown neighborhood here in Brooklyn. But we still owned and operated the business, and still, and I've stayed here the whole time. So I literally have spent my entire life in this building. Okay. From the time I was a little kid, I liked helping people, and because our clientele was generally immigrant community, middle class, hardworking people who couldn't necessarily afford lawyers for every little thing. Occasionally people would come in and ask questions or have forms that they needed assistance with. And so I helped them fill out forms and do things like that. So whether it was an application for Medicaid, or whether it was applying for Social Security benefits, or something of that nature, passport applications, things like that. I helped people do that. And so with that ethic and with that commitment to the neighborhood, I was involved in a lot of local organizations, a lot of civic groups, and continued to do what I could to help people in the neighborhood, because I'm a part of the neighborhood, I'm part of the community. And so I found that the best reason to become a lawyer. And so I've been doing that ever since. And that's my objective. So when I sit in front of a client and I'm listening to their stories, I'm listening to my story. And listen to my family's story. And so that connection makes it possible for me to relate to our clients and then try to impart upon them the same type of ethos that we have here at the Latsis Law Firm. And so for us, it's all about families, yours, ours, everyone's, right? So what do most people want to know when they come to these types of workshops? I'm sure you've been invited to some of these things before, whether it's ours or some other workshops. But the most important thing that people think about is, can I protect my stuff, right? And can I protect it from the government, from long-term care, from family members that I don't want to necessarily get my things, right? And how do I go about doing that? They want to find out what a trust is. They've heard that word. They want to know what that is. They want to know the difference between irrevocable and revocable, and we'll touch on that today. They want to know, how can they avoid probate, and whether they should need to worry about avoiding probate, and what probate is. If you give away your stuff to your kids or your others, should you do it, right? And if that's the best way to protect your stuff, and we'll talk about that. And if you give your stuff away, will it take 60 months? People have heard that 60 months or 5-year look back. Will it take 60 months for it to be safe? And we'll talk about that today, okay? They're going to want to know, most people want to know what a power of attorney is. They've heard the term. They use it a lot of ways, but most of the times they use it in an improper way. They don't realize that that's not what a power of attorney is. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the difference between the power of attorney and a living will and a healthcare proxy. Okay. And how can I plan for disabled beneficiaries, right? You might have a child or a grandchild or someone who has a disability. How do you protect that, right? How do you make sure they get what they should get without losing their benefits, right? So that's something people ask a lot about. They want to know if their IRAs are safe. And do you need any kind of special planning for IRAs? So we'll talk about that briefly. And how can I avoid estate taxes? Okay. So if there's anything else that's you want to know that's not on this list, please, we'll discuss it. Okay. So make a note and we'll discuss it as we move along. All right. So what are the goals of this workshop, right? To identify if your current plan, if you have one, meets your goals. Okay. To understand what it takes to protect your stuff, and then determine whether everything you have or what your plan does that, okay? And to show you how to get what's missing. And the way we're going to do all this is we're going to anchor some of the concepts to stories that we're going to tell, all right? And those stories are going to give you the ability to relate to the concepts, okay? Because I'm not here to teach you legalese. I'm here to teach you practicalities, okay? So, what are the 3 steps? Okay, very simple. We can end the presentation right now. Know the rules, know your predators, know your options. Have a nice day. Now, what is that? Right? Obviously, that's just the basics, right? These are the concepts. So we're going to go into this, right? So, knowing the rules. So the government has rules for you when it comes to your stuff, right? While you're alive and after your death. Okay. The government's rules for how things are dealt with while you're alive deal with things like a power of attorney, for example. Power of attorney is a legal document, and it's a document that says, me as principal, I delegate to an agent certain authority to handle certain legal or financial matters for me, okay? A healthcare proxy is similar because you as the principal are delegating medical decisions to someone other than yourself, okay? So that's how it's different. Power of attorney doesn't deal with medical. Healthcare proxy does. The healthcare proxy does not deal with financial. Power of attorney does. Okay? And a living will is sort of a hybrid of the healthcare proxy. It's a more specific delegation, stating very explicitly what your wishes are in certain end of life situations. Okay? And if you don't have any of these, okay, then the government has a process called legal guardianship. And legal guardianship comes in when you don't have any of these documents, you don't have any of these planning documents in place, and someone has to become your agent. And because there's no legal authority written down anywhere making that person the agent, someone has to go to court, have 2 doctors sign off on your physical incapacity, and then there's a hearing and a trial that takes place, okay? And then that person or someone else is appointed the agent for the person who's being sought to be protected. Okay, so those are the processes. Okay, that's the government's rules for while you're alive. The government rules for dealing with things for you when you're gone are governed by certain other concepts. The last will and testament. Okay, I'm sure you've all heard of the last will and testament. Is a written document where you write in while you're alive who you want to be in control of your stuff when you're gone. That's the executor. Who you want to get your stuff, those are the beneficiaries, and requires a process called probate. Probate is a government process. It's a court-related process. It requires that the original will be offered into court. People be put on notice, typically your relatives, right? They have to be put on notice whether they're in the will or not, that a will exists, and they have the opportunity to contest it, to say the person that person who did this will did not understand what they were doing, or they were tricked into doing it, or they were being forced into doing it, okay? And that's why I'm not getting 90% of the estate or whatever, right? So that's a process, and it costs money, okay? If you don't have a will and you pass away, the government's rules for dealing with your estate is something called administration. Administration has already built into it a hierarchy of who gets your stuff. So if you're a single person and you have 2 kids, right? And you pass away, your 2 kids are going to get everything 50-50. Okay. Now, that may be something you want, right? But if, let's say you have 3 kids and the one kid is estranged and you haven't spoken to that kid in 30 years, and now you don't want that kid to get anything, if you don't have a will, that kid's going to get a third, whether you like it or not. Okay. So that's administration. Okay. Now, and what can happen in a scenario like that is you have other beneficiaries that may come into play without even realizing it. So, for example, if you were to pass away and you had no kids and you had siblings, right? And now one of your siblings had died before you did. That sibling's share is going to go to that sibling's kids. So they may be nieces and nephews you didn't never met or anything like that. Same thing, right? So the concept is it's already predetermined for you. Okay. Both of those processes, okay, administration or probate, are they involve court, they involve lawyers, they involve fees. They typically take somewhere between 7 and 9 months. Right now in Brooklyn, they're taking closer to 18, right? Just because of COVID delays and other delays. Okay. It's a public process and it's expensive. Okay. Between lawyers' fees, executors' commissions, things of that nature, the average estate ranges between 5 and 20% of what the value of the estate is.
So to avoid all that, you just do a will and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, see, a will can still lead to that. See, a will can still lead to that. That's probate also is like that. Okay, that's why we're going to talk about trusts in a few minutes. Okay, but that's the process. Okay, and the AARP is a pretty trusted source for information on this. When I turned 50 a few years ago, the first thing that I got in the mail was an invitation to join the AARP. It was life altering. All right, so those are the government's rules, and those are kind of the different things that we talk about. So there are, there's documents, and we talked about those very briefly: the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, the living will, okay, and the last will and testament. There's a distinction between documents and planning, okay, because documents are just very pro forma. All right, if you're just interested in doing documents, you can go on our website. We have a website, the do-it-yourself program on our website. You can do very simple, power of attorney, healthcare proxy, living will, very basic, no real frills, just really straightforward, right? You can do that. And for some people that works. But the difference between the two has to deal with the detail. Okay, as they always say, the devil's always in the details, right? So the general power of attorney. Anybody here have a power of attorney?
I do. You
okay, right. So and so what you have is basically the general power of attorney, right? Okay, so that could work in the scenario you're in. But for the most part, it's a blank check. You typically walk around with a check and signed and just leave it blank. Yeah. No, right? Okay. So the typical power of attorney that people have, right, because they haven't put into it, a lot of detail, is essentially a blank check. You're giving your agent full authority to do just about everything. Okay. And sometimes that can be very powerful. Obviously, it's a very powerful tool. But sometimes it's not powerful enough because it's lacking certain other authority that's not in the general form.
I have the healthcare proxy.
So those are the types of things that are different between documents and planning. Okay. So is it, are you giving someone full authority? Are you giving them instructions? Are you telling them, what they can spend money on, what they can't spend money on, or what types of investments they can make, that sort of thing. You can be very detailed in a power of attorney. Okay. And that's an important tool. It's an important amount of power that you can retain. Okay. A healthcare proxy, okay, is similar. Typically speaking, most people don't get a healthcare proxy from a lawyer. They get it at the hospital or at the doctor's office, right? So that's sort of like me sitting in my office and having a prescription pad and giving people prescriptions all day, right? I don't have a license to do prescriptions. They don't have a license to practice law. So what does that tell you about the form that they're giving you? It's very generic, very non-specific, right? And it's essentially what we call the God proxy. So you're giving that person, that agent, full power to play God. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing, right? Because you're in the hospital, you're unable to make medical decisions for yourself, and you have said, I delegate that authority to so-and-so, typically a child or a spouse or something like that. And what we typically tell clients is if that's what your intention is, pick the child you like the least to do that,
Yeah.
right? Because that's going to be the one that's going to have to agonize over the decision, right? So that's how you punish them, right? But so that's an important type of thing to think about, to consider. Now you can be very specific, okay, in a healthcare proxy. You can be very specific as to organ donation, or you can be very specific as to the types of medication you do and you do not want to take, right? You can certainly say there are certain treatments in advance if you know specifically the type of illness you may have, right? You can be specific as to say, I don't want this particular treatment, all right? Absolutely, absolutely. And you can be very specific with all of that. And that retains the power that you have right now while you're alive.
Right.
The types of decisions you would be able to make for yourself, okay? Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar, and why is this important? I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Terri Schiavo back in the early 2000s. Terri Schiavo was a woman who had just recently married her husband, and maybe a few months after they had gotten married, she got into this really bad car accident. And she was in a coma, and she was in a coma a really, really long time, okay? And after a while, her husband was, essentially saying, look, she's suffering, we're all suffering, please pull the plug. This is all in Florida. Her parents, though, they didn't want to pull the plug, right? They were of the opinion, well, they're only recently married, so why should he have that type of decision-making power, right? And so they went into court. They fought it out. It took like a year and a half in court. But finally, the court said, the husband was going to get the right to pull the plug. They did. She passed away within minutes. I mean, just right away, right? But that agony that family went through, all that stress, all that anxiety, all that upsettedness, right, could have all been avoided, right? If Terri Schiavo had done a power of attorney, or I'm sorry, a healthcare proxy that said or spelled out certain wishes, right? So that's how it can be very important, okay? The other part of it is, sometimes you run into situations where, you have a healthcare proxy and the person has been delegated the authority, and because of the lack of specificity, they're not sure what to do. And so, the family agonizes, and it's kind of useless, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a very important, type of thing to be specific with it. And a living will is also very simple. The living will can be very specific, the certain circumstances, you can pick how many days you want to be kept alive, what type of treatments you want to be kept alive with, and et cetera. But you can also do something that we do here with our healthcare proxies, and we offer that to people, and that is a personal care plan. So you can be very specific as to circumstances if you're disabled, or if you're, in certain physical conditions that require assistance, right? You can be very specific. I want to be taken out, every Monday to the park, or I want to go to the movies once a week, or I want to, make sure, as long as I'm presentable, I want to go to family functions, things like that, right? And you can be very specific about that, okay? So that's a very important, that's the difference between, documents and planning, okay? And the will, again, same thing, be very specific about your wishes, okay? So who are your predators, right? So that's the predators, right? So this is part 2 of the 3 steps, okay? So the predator, what's a predator, right? A predator is someone or something that just sits waiting around and waiting for the opportunity to take, right? They're takers, okay? We have a society of takers, right? So the government's a predator, long-term care, your family, lawsuits, those are typical predators. Government, when the government is your predator, it could be in a couple of different contexts, right? The first is guardianship. We talked about that before, right? Guardianship is a predator because of how expensive it is, okay? To do a guardianship proceeding, you need lawyers, right? You need doctors, you need judges, you need court evaluators, and recurring fees. The only people who make money in guardianships are the government, okay? The only people who make money in government in guardianships, okay? So if you can avoid it, okay? Probate, right? We talked about probate and how that costs money, right? Between the executor's fees, the lawyer's fees, the court filing fees, the delays, the expenses of maintaining the estate until you have the authority to do what you have to do, all of that, right? All of that can be avoided, right? But that's a government predator, okay? And remember, 5 to 20%, right? So $1 million estate. Let's say you have a house, a couple of bank accounts. Not unheard of to have $1 million estate in Brooklyn. Not unheard of, right? Okay, so a 5% fee is $50,000. right? $50,000 just like that. Okay. Taxes, less of a concern today because of the thresholds. But if your estate is over $12 million, right, that means everything you have, then anything over that gets taxed at 40% by the federal government. Okay. And for New York State, it's anything over $6 million. So you can have like an $8 million estate, for example, no tax to the federal government, but about 16 times, about $320,000 to the state. Okay. So that's, so these are numbers you should worry about. Now, these numbers they seem relatively high now, but they're going to be cut in half by 2026. Okay. Because the law that has the current estate tax laws right now expire in 2026. I think they'll go back to numbers that were in place when this started. Okay. The estate tax is one of those things that moves all the time. Okay. There was only 1 year in the history of my lifetime where there was no estate tax. That was 2010, because the previous law with the estate tax had expired and they had not renewed it. And because of that 1 year that without the estate tax, a lot of estates went through without any tax. So for example, one of the stories that I love is that, I'm a New York Yankees fan. In 2010, George Steinbrenner died, right? And if George Steinbrenner had died in any other year, the Yankees would have had to been sold to pay the estate tax. They're worth about $2 billion, right? About $1 billion of estate tax, maybe more, right? So because he died in 2010, they didn't have to. The family didn't have to sell the Yankees.
George is the man,
right? I secretly think they kept him alive, but that's it. So that was, right. So that was so you can see that can have real consequences. Okay. Long-term care costs. Okay, that's another government predator. So what are long-term care costs? So you can have the ability to stay at home, right? Have an aide assist you, right? And on averages, depending on how many days, how many hours you have with the aide, somewhere between $500 and as much as $18,000 a month, right? Typical aides get about $45 an hour, roughly.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you got a 24-hour aide, that number racks up real quick, right?
Yeah.
Assisted living, place like Sunrise here in
Yeah.
Brooklyn.
I'm trying to do that for my mom, but they're talking about
Sunrise is one of our partners. We host events at Sunrise every month. It's a beautiful facility.
Oh, we can talk
But the average cost of a stay at Sunrise is between $4,500 and $12,000, right? The base rent is about $4,500. So if you want to get a nice apartment and you want to have the appropriate benefits and food, whatever, $7,500 nut is not unheard of. And it's wonderful. If you can afford it, it's great. Okay. Nursing home. Okay. Nursing home is skilled. It's medical, right? There's medical facilities on site. It's part medical facility, part living facility, and they average between $9,000 and $14,000 a month in this area. Okay. So how are you going to pay for all that? You have the money in the bank. It's great. You don't have any kids. You don't want to leave anybody any money. You can pay for it privately if you want. So most people, though, when they think about it, they think about Medicaid, right? And how Medicaid can help them. Okay. So, Medicaid is a complex set of rules and exceptions, but most people have heard that, they can take you home, right? They've heard that you have to give everything away to protect it, right? You need to wait 60 months once you've given everything away to qualify. But the reality is all of that is true and not true at the same time, right? Because that's where exceptions and rules come in. Okay. So, and we'll talk about that shortly. How we can help you there. Okay. Unanticipated predators or unintended predators, right? So you get the family members. Okay. So let's say you're remarried and you have stepchildren, right? That potentially could be an issue, or you have children who, or your spouse needs long-term care, right? That's a potential predator for you. Okay. Your children, right? If your children are constantly on the verge of bankruptcy, or they have addictions, those types of things are unintended predators who can end up taking money away from you, but also from themselves. Okay. Anything you can save, spend, or give away without restriction, any of your predators can do the same. All right. That's the concept you have to understand, right? So if you have complete access and control to everything you own, it can be taken away from you. Okay. And we'll come back to that in a minute, right? But the same thing happens to be the case for your beneficiaries. So let's say you have a bank account, I'll give you an example, and you have a son, and your son is your beneficiary. Upon your death, everything goes to your son, okay? Because it's his, and he can save, spend, and give it away right away upon his death. If he owes American Express $150,000, guess what? American Express is taking it.
They take it, right.
Right? So you could plan to protect it so your son doesn't lose that money if you wanted to, right? So we'll talk about how we do that, okay? Lawsuits, okay? We lawyers, we're major predators, okay? But essentially, you get into an accident, God forbid, and you don't have enough insurance, and now, you're being sued for, more than your coverage, right? That's a predator. That's someone who can take your stuff away, okay? So we can protect against that if you want to. And the same is the case for your beneficiaries. Think about the son again, right? Son, he's getting the beneficiary, he's the beneficiary of that account. Now, all of a sudden, or I'll give you a better example. You put your son on your house, you have a deed, and now you put your son on the deed, right? So now, if he gets sued, you're gonna be just as, you're gonna be just as exposed as he is, because he's on that asset, right? So that's why, if we go back, remember the first one of the questions was, should you give this stuff away to your family before? This is why, okay? So, knowing your options. Now we're up to step 3. This is the reason you're here, okay? Estate planning, right? That's how you can protect a lot of what you have. Estate planning, okay? And the biggest impediment to people doing estate planning is their own reluctance to do it. Most people think that if they do any kind of estate planning, they're going to die. I'm here to tell you that if you don't do estate planning, you're going to die.
Either way.
No matter what you do, right? So it's better to plan, okay? Estate planning determines who's in control, who gets what and when, okay? And who gets the benefit, okay? And you get to determine that. Typical estate plans, what most people want to do is they want to stay in control, okay? They want to be able to determine who gets everything, right? They don't want to become a burden to their families, okay? Which is understandable, right? I don't think anyone here wants to do that, okay? And they want to keep it simple. What does keep it simple mean to most people? Keep it simple means to most people, cheap, right? The more simple they think it is, the cheaper it is. But I'm here to tell you, just keeping it simple isn't necessarily cheaper, right? What's the most simple thing you can do? Think back a few minutes, right?
You have to plan for, put everything, as you say, make a plan. You have a plan.
Even simpler than that. Nothing. You do nothing, right? Administration, right? Very simple. Doesn't cost you a dime. Right? Doesn't cost you a dime. You die, and now what happens? Lawyers, delays, all that stuff, and all of a sudden 5 to 20% is gone, right? So the cheapest thing you could do is pretty expensive, right? Okay, so that's the concept, right? Keeping it simple isn't necessarily keeping it cheap, okay? So our goal here is to explain to you the difference between just keeping it simple and just planning. And you'll see that the cost, really, the difference in cost is not dramatic. It really isn't, okay? So with just a simple amount of time and some little bit of thinking, everything can be done appropriately and you can protect everything you have, okay? So, what are your options? Obviously, we just talked about it. You could just do nothing, let guardianship, probate, estate administration be your guide, right? Okay? Or option 2, protecting from long-term care costs, right? We can minimize those costs, right? And how do we minimize those costs? We'll talk about that in a few seconds. But you can look at what it's going to cost for you to be taken care of and think about the different options, right? You could privately pay. You've got a store of wealth. You've worked your entire life to put it together. You have no problem spending it. That's perfectly fine. A perfectly legitimate, thing to think about. But most people want to leave something for somebody, right? They want to have a legacy, right? Or they want to enjoy it for themselves, right? As opposed to giving it to the government. You can get long-term care insurance, right? Not an option for most people, okay? Last year, about 60,000 policies were written in the whole United States. Insurance companies are getting out of the business. There's all kinds of limitations. The average cost of a premium is somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 a year, right? and the coverage limits are small, okay? Typically speaking, depending on the average policy, somewhere between $250,000 in total coverage to about $500,000. Now, if you're in a nursing home and you're paying $14,000 a month, right?
That's no money.
What's that, 3 years?
Yeah.
That's it, right? So, so long-term care insurance is not a real option. There's community Medicaid or Veterans Aid and Attendance. Veterans is, you have to be a veteran, okay? Community Medicaid is care at home, okay? So that's a home attendant, someone assisting you at home. Right now, it's still 30-day qualification, but starting in March of next year, that's going to change to 30 months. Okay.
Even for veterans?
Just for a community Medicaid, the veterans is still 30 days, but veterans is limited. There's a lot of limitations on veterans. We don't do a lot of veterans work, but it's limited. So the other option, right, would be Medicaid, crisis Medicaid. Okay.
Excuse me?
Yes.
What's the difference between Medicaid and community? Medicaid?
Well, community Medicaid is care at home, right? So community Medicaid, the eligibility is a little easier. Okay. You can keep or you can retain some of your income, right, through something called a pool trust. Okay, but you get to stay at home. Okay, because you're still in the community. That's what the community Medicaid means. Okay, nursing home, you're no longer in the community. Your community is the nursing home. Okay, so that requires a whole other set of qualifications. And as we briefly touched upon earlier, right, there's the look back period of 60 months and things like that, right? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But typically speaking, when you're going into a facility and you need to apply for Medicaid, there's an application process, and it depends on what you've done to determine how you're eligible. Okay, so we're going to meet Mary Smith and Mr. and Mrs. Richards, right? Mary Smith is what we call a crisis case. Okay, that means that Mary is ready to go into a facility. She has done no planning. Okay, and Mr. and Mrs. Richards, they're healthy at the moment, and they're planning in the event that they have to go into a facility. Okay, so Mary Smith. So Mary Smith's daughter reached out to us, okay, and she indicated that her mother needs to go into a facility. Her father was still alive, okay, and the facility needed to do an application. So she had gone to their family lawyer, and their family lawyer had suggested a few things to them to explain what the eligibility would be. So Mary knew me from the community. She had come, Mary's mother had Mary knew me from the community. Her daughter knew of me, and she reached out and she said, she called me up. She said, "Look, I need a second opinion. We spoke to our family lawyer. Mom's got to go into a facility. You know us, pretty well. The situation is pretty dire, and my siblings, they want to make sure that we're doing the right thing." So it's okay, it's fine. So tell me a little bit what's going on, right? So she told me that they have a house. Mary and her husband have a house. They have a car, some cash, and some stocks and investments. And I asked Mary's daughter, what did the lawyer tell you? Okay. So she said the lawyer told us that they can keep the house. The mom could go into the facility, and yes, they could. Husband and wife, right? So on the doctrine of the state recovery, if Mary were to predecease dad, the husband, then the house would go to him, and so Medicaid would not take it. Okay, so that's fine. Now, if Mary was single and she was the only one on the deed, they'd have a problem. Okay, but she'd still be eligible. Okay, it's just that there would be a lien on the house when she passed away. Okay. He told her that they get to keep the car. That's true. They get to keep the car. Told her that the cash of $105,000, they get to keep that as well. But she said that the lawyer told them they had to spend down the $275,000 stocks. They had to spend that down. They had to use that to pay for the facility until mom would be eligible for Medicaid. Okay. So I said to Mary's daughter, I said, "Mary, do me a favor. Fax me all that information. Give me 24 hours. Let me go through your numbers. Okay. Let me take a look at what you have, and let me see if I can, make a different recommendation." Okay. So the next morning I send her a fax and I explained to her that, we can protect all of us, right? And mom could be eligible right away for Medicaid without having to pay anything at all. So I send her an email that says all that. She calls me up. She said, "What's the big idea? What are you talking about? How could that possibly be the case? I already spoke to a lawyer. He told me, this is what has to happen." And I said to Mary's daughter, I said, Mary, I understand, right? And, there are people who do this all the time, and there are people who do this sometimes. And I can tell you that, we can get this done for you. Now, you want to go with the other plan, it's fine. It's perfectly legit, but I'm telling you we can do this, okay? So she spoke to her siblings. 3 or 4 hours later, she called up. They came in. They hired us. We did our stuff. We did her application. And sure enough, Mary Smith got on Medicaid. She was in the nursing home. They didn't lose any of the stuff, right? Mary Smith is still alive. Dad's still alive. And, he's enjoying, access to this money, okay? So it can be done, right? Did they have to wait 60 months? No, right? They didn't have to wait 60 months at all, okay? Now, this changes. Some of these facts change, the circumstances change, right? So there may not necessarily be an immediate qualification in a different circumstance. But with these facts, right, able to qualify right away, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Richards, okay? They're in their 70s. They came in and they want to plan because they're concerned that, if they get sick, if one of them goes in, they don't have any children, they don't have anyone to take care of them. So if one of them gets sick and has to go into a nursing home, or both have to go into a nursing home, they don't want to necessarily lose everything, okay? They have some siblings. They want to make sure that they get their assets. So they have a co-op and some cash, a car, and some stocks, right? About $577,000, right? So now they've heard, like everyone has heard, that they need to wait 60 months or 5 years before they'd be eligible for Medicaid. But if you've learned anything so far, you've learned what?
They can keep all that and still get it.
Well, I'll be more general. That Medicaid is a complex set of rules and exceptions, right? So that means that there probably is a solution where they'll be qualified a lot sooner, right? And they will, right? So we sat down with them, we looked at their numbers, we went over everything, and we proposed a plan. It involved some trusts and some other work. And we were able to protect $449,000 immediately.
Wow.
Immediately. So that means that after they left my office, if one of them had to go into a nursing home, right? The only thing at risk would be the $128,000. $449,000 were already protected. Okay. Now, this balance of $128,000 was only going to be at risk for a total of 37 months. Okay. Not 50, not 60. Okay. After the 37 months, each month that would pass by, another $3,459 would be protected from this 128. Right? So if they stayed healthy, they wait the 60 months, it's all protected. But if God forbid something happens right away, they protect a good amount of it right away, right? And that's a lot better than zero.
Yeah.
Right? So with strategic planning, okay, which we do, okay, we can protect a lot right away, okay? So everybody's got their own numbers in your packets. There's a form to fill out if you want, and we can look at your numbers and give you a sense of what we can do for you too, okay? No obligation, completely free, okay? So how do we do it? Well, we have these magic things that we call trusts, okay? And they're really not magic, okay? So here's what everyone wants to know, right? What's a trust, okay? So a trust is a document, and it's a document that says, or is a written agreement between the person who makes the trust, the grantor, and the trustee, right? The trustee is the person who manages it, okay? And it can be done in a bunch of different ways. You can have something called a testamentary trust, okay? And that's a trust that's simply set up in a will. So you design that for protecting someone else, right? That would be for a circumstance if, for example, you're not concerned about protecting things for yourself, but you have an estate, you have a grandson that you want to protect. You could create a trust within the will that says, everything that I want to go for my grandson stays into this trust. I appoint a person to be that trustee, and it stays in trust for that grandson until you say when he gets it. Okay. So like I said, that protects other people, doesn't protect you. Okay. A living trust is simply that. It's a trust that you've written while you're alive that's designed to assist you and protect you and others, if that's what you want to do. And they fall into a bunch of different categories. There's the revocable living trust and the irrevocable living trust. What's the difference, right? Revocable means just that. You can change it anytime you want. You can revoke it anytime you want. So when you put stuff into the trust and you decide you don't want it to be in the trust anymore, you can take it out. It's completely under your control. And because it's completely under your control and everything that's in it is completely under your control, it's what? Not protected. Because remember, anything you can save, spend, or give away without restriction can also be taken away by your creditors. Okay?
So why would you do that?
Probate avoidance. Okay? It is an effective tool for avoiding probate because the minute you pass away, it becomes irrevocable. All right? So at that point, everything that's in the trust goes to who you want it to go to.
Right.
And it avoids the whole probate process.
Oh, yeah, the trust, yeah, the trust.
Right?
While you're alive.
While you're alive, you're completely in control. You do what you want. It doesn't protect.
But it's not protected.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
But the minute you pass away, everything goes to your beneficiaries. It doesn't go through the probate process. It's all done. Okay? So you save 18 months of heartache, and you save the expenses, and you save everything else that goes along with the probate process, right? By doing a revocable trust. Okay? An irrevocable trust has a lot of different components to it. There's a lot of different kinds of irrevocable trusts. And essentially, the way to best think about an irrevocable trust is to think of it as a closed box. Okay? And by a closed box, I mean, think about, if you put all your stuff somewhere, you're gonna put it somewhere, right? Whether it's a safe or, think of a trust as a safe, as a box. Okay? And if it's closed, right? It's closed to your creditors and it's closed to you. Okay? Which means that you put everything in here and you've revoked certain abilities and actions that you can take with regards to the stuff that you have in. What's the most important thing that you revoked? The ability to keep it for yourself. Okay? So what you do in that scenario is subject to the rules that you set forth. The things that are in here are managed. You can control it. You can enjoy the fruits of it, interest, rental. If you have a rental property, the rental income, dividends, that you can do. But the principal is not yours. It's nobody's until you die. Okay? But it's in the trust. Okay? So let's say you have $1 million and you live off the interest 4%. That's $40,000 a year. You live off the $40,000 a year. The $1 million is completely protected. The $40,000 is yours. Right? Okay. We have these boxes here, right? So you can see that's the control. That's the limit of control. You see this box that we have here that we use, right? It's closed. Because of the rules that you set forth, you can make certain withdrawals, right? Income, dividends, things like that. The more you have access to, the more you keep unprotected.
Right.
Okay. So the more you leave without those restrictions, with the restrictions, the more you protect. Okay. So those are irrevocable trusts. And then you see this one last one that's completely closed. Okay. That's the type of trust you use for tax avoidance, right? Or tax deferral. Okay. You cede all control in that scenario. You have no ability to direct, nothing. You put everything in the trust. It's a gift already to your beneficiaries, subject to the rules that you set forth. Okay. So those are the different kinds of trusts. I'm going to give you some examples. So, a lot of people come to us and think about trust and what they want to do, right? So generally speaking, what we have is a husband and wife come in and their assets are symbolized by these $20 bills, right? So they come in, husband and wife, they have $40, okay? Right? And they decide that they want to set up a trust for their family, okay? And the trust that most people, when they first come in here, they want to do is everything I have upon my death goes to my spouse, and then after that it goes to my kids, right? So they have the $40, right? It's together, and in this scenario, so mom and dad come in, they want to do that, so mom and dad have that $40, and they have a son and a daughter, okay? So mom and dad, we've done the trust, we put all their money in the joint trust for them, and dad dies, right? We always, by the way, in the next few stories, dad gets killed first in all the stories, okay? So just, yeah, that's what we do. So, poor dad. But nobody wants to kill mom, you know? All right, so that happens, okay? So mom and dad come in, dad dies, right? So now mom is sitting there with the trust, and there's $40 in the trust, or symbolized, by the $40. And now mom wants to buy a car, right? And the rules that they set forth are that mom and daughter are going to be the joint trustees after dad dies, right?
Right.
So mom now wants to buy a new car, and she calls up her daughter and she says, daughter, I need $40,000 from the trust because I want to buy a new car. And daughter tells mom, no. Okay. So mom gets upset and she says to her two very important words. One of them starts with F. Yeah, you're fired. See, I know you were thinking the other one.
yeah.
No, but she says she fires her daughter and she calls up son. She says, son, your sister won't let me buy the car. She said that Dodge Dart that I've been driving around since the 1970s, that's got that hole in the side that she says is like air conditioning. She says that's a perfectly acceptable car for your mom, right? Now, son, you don't believe that to be the case, do you? And so it's like, mom, I love you. No, you're right. I agree with you. I'll be your trustee. You can buy that Cadillac Escalade you want, no problem.
Right.
And so she hires him, she makes him the trustee. Why could she do that? Because the trust that mom and dad put together said that she could do that, right? Because it said everything goes to her subject to the rules, right? And the rules are, if she wants it, she can get it, okay? So, same scenario now. Mom and dad decide, I've told them this story and they're not comfortable with that scenario. So mom and dad decide, okay, fine. We're gonna take our money, right? We're gonna divide it. Half is gonna go to dad and half is gonna be assigned to mom. And we create a trust for dad and a trust for mom, okay? So now we've created the same scenario, mom and dad, sister, daughter and son, right? So now dad dies, okay? Dad's trust is set aside, mom's got her trust. Mom now, she has a house and she can't manage the pool. They've got this big, beautiful pool, and dad used to do all the pool cleaning and she can't do the pool cleaning anymore. So she hires a pool company and they send Biff, the pool boy. Biff is one of the most famous pool boys in the neighborhood because whenever he comes to clean pools, he wears this very tight Speedo all throughout the yard and he cleans pools like nobody's business. Okay. Well, after a few months of cleaning the pools, Biff and mom become very friendly. And Biff says to her, mom, if you want, we can go to the Bahamas together. I promise I'll wear my Speedo everywhere we go, right? And we'll have a great time. So mom picks up the phone. She calls her daughter. She says, daughter, I want $10,000 from dad's trust so that I can go to the Bahamas with Biff, the pool boy. We promise he's going to wear a Speedo. We promised we'd have a great time. Daughter turned around to mom and said, what? Said, no, you can't have it. You can't have the money. I'm sorry, you can't have the money. Right? So mom says to her, what?
You find it,
Right.
but you can't.
But you can't. Why?
Because it's dead.
Because both of them have it.
Dad's trust says that if mom is going to cohabit with any man, right, then she doesn't get anything from dad's trust, right? And it stays for the kids, okay? So mom gets all in a huff, but she realizes she's got her own trust. Then she takes the $10,000 from her trust and she goes on vacation with Biff, the pool boy, okay? Now, why was she okay with it? Because mom's trust said the same thing about dad. Because if mom had died first, dad was not getting anything from mom's trust if he found some little shiksa, right, to get together with, right? So because that was their plan, they were comfortable with it, right? Perfectly arranged, okay? Let's take that story a little further, right? Instead of mom going to the Bahamas, mom is down in a nursing home, okay? And the nursing home bill comes and they say to her, listen, you got to call your daughter to get money from dad's trust to pay this nursing home bill. So she calls up her daughter. She says, daughter, I'm in this nursing home and they're telling me I gotta pay this bill. You gotta give me money from dad's trust. And daughter says, no, not giving you a dime. And they can't take it from me. Why not? Because the rules say mom can't direct it. It's not hers anymore, right? And so mom turns around and she says to herself, these kids today, I just don't know what to do, right? And so, she has to go on Medicaid and they get paid, but they don't lose the money from dad's trust, right? Okay, so that's the interplay. She couldn't direct it anymore, okay? All right, and because of that lack of direction, they couldn't take it from her and they couldn't force her to give it up, okay? Take it a little further now. Mom and dad have created these two trusts and now they're both gone, okay? And the money is now to the kids, okay? And son and daughter are the trustees. And now daughter says, I want to go to Florida. I want to buy a condo and get married and hopefully enjoy the weather in Florida. I hate the weather in New York. She calls up son, his brother. I want my money from the trust so I can go buy this condo. And brother says to her, sister, mom and dad set up this trust to protect them as well as us. Why don't I have the trust use your money, your share of the money, to buy the apartment, and the trust will own the apartment? And sister thought about it for a minute. She goes, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So they buy the condo in Florida for her. She moves into the condo in Florida. After a few, good morning, have a seat. After a few months, she marries and she finds a new mate, and now she's married and they're living in this condo that the trust owns, okay? And she's taken up gardening, right? She loves gardening. The beautiful weather makes it easy for her to garden in her backyard. And he has taken up golf. So his favorite hole is the 19th hole. Anybody here ever play golf? Okay.
But I know.
All right. So if you've played golf or you know anything about golf, you know that there are 18 holes on the golf course. And the 19th hole is the bar. That's where you go after the round is over. You have a few cold ones, maybe have a sandwich, and you talk about how great your round was, right? Even though you shot 104. Okay. Well, he meets Bambi. She's the cocktail waitress at the bar. And Bambi has 36 double Ds, and she strokes up against him every once in a while, and she winks at him every so often. And he comes home after several months of going to the 19th hole, and he turns to his wife and he says, wife, I'm getting a divorce. I met my soulmate. Bambi and I have matching tattoos. We're gonna get matching tattoos. We're gonna get on our Harleys, going across country. Here's where I'm going. Send me my half. I'll see you later, right? Does he get the condo?
No, he shouldn't get the condo. Why should he get the condo?
Why not?
Because it was a trust. Yeah,
exactly.
Bambi had no right there. You don't have to know about it.
Exactly. So what did mom and dad do? Having never met the son-in-law, right? They protected it for their daughter, even though the son-in-law, who they had never met, right, had never existed, without even thinking about it, they protected it.
Yeah.
Right? So you see the power?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's all I wanted.
That's why trusts are very powerful.
That's all I wanted to
okay? All right. So I want you to think of those stories when we talk about trusts, okay? All right. It's one of my favorite stories, the Bambi story. It's the one everybody. Biff. So how do you do this, right? So it's really about your voice, your rules, what you want your trust to do. A lot of people come in here and it's basically, look, I just want a basic trust, right? And we sit down and we have a conversation with them, and sometimes it is. The intention is they want to do something relatively basic. But sometimes, we want to, flesh out the details, right? Flesh out some of those ideas, those concepts, right? We talk about Bambi, we talk about Biff, we talk about those things with, our potential clients so that we can understand, how far they want to go with protecting you. And it doesn't cost that much extra to do that, right? It really doesn't, right? It's just a little bit of time, a little bit of thinking, okay? And if you think about it, you spend your entire life, putting it together, right? You sweat, you toil, you bled, you did what you had to. I mean, half an hour? You can't spend half an hour thinking this through, or an hour, right? Okay. So you want to create that rule book. That's what your trust is, your will, your whatever you want to do. And you want to integrate all that with what you have, and then you want to maintain. So what is integration? Right? So I'm going to skip through some of this, right? So let's talk about integration real quick. I don't know if you remember those old radio flyer wagons, right? It's depicted here, right? Those little red wagons. Your trust is the wagon, okay? And the person who's pulling it is your trustee, right? And the trust that we can create, you could be the trustee, okay? So if you're rolling around with the wagon, there's nothing in it. It looks kind of silly, right? It's kind of pointless, right? So the whole idea is you want to put stuff into the wagon, right? That's what we call integration. You need to put the assets actually into the trust. A lot of lawyers will prepare the trusts, and then that's it. They leave it to your own devices. But if you don't put the deed in the house, the deed to the house in the trust, you don't transfer the bank accounts into the trust and have the title change. You don't do any of that stuff. The trust is worthless, right? So we help you with that. We do that for you. Okay, that's part of what we do. Integrating it is important.
Right. Why would a lawyer make a trust and then not have you put anything in it?
It's work.
Oh, yeah, because
It's work.
Work.
It's work. It's work.
right, the
Yeah.
tenant don't care. They don't,
Because that's the difference between lawyers who do this on a regular basis and lawyers who just do stuff, right? They just fill out forms, right? Because you can get a trust for a couple of $1,000s, let's say, right? It's not a really good one, whatever, and they don't do anything. They don't do anything with it. It's
Why
useless.
then? Why would I even, as a client, get a trust?
Because you don't know anything.
because you don't know better, exactly, because you don't know.
Yeah,
better.
I can't tell you how many times clients have come in here with trusts already, right? And they want they want to amend whatever, and then I go online and I see, well, the house is not in the trust.
Mhm.
Well, let me see your bank statements. Your bank statements aren't into the trust. It's like, well, what did you do with this? It's just, what is this? This is just paper, right? Happens all the time, right? So you got to integrate it, okay? And when we talk about integration, we also think about these other types of accounts, right? Joint accounts, beneficiary designations, things like that. A lot of people will think they've done a trust, they've done all this, and then that covers these accounts. But unless you change the title, right, then this is going to supersede that.
Mhm.
So if you have, 4 beneficiaries of your trust, right, and that's how you want everything to go, but you have an account and one kid is the beneficiary, when you die, that kid's going to get that account. And it's not going to be part of this, right? That may be what you want, but it might not be, right? So you want to make sure it all kind of fits together, okay? And things change, right? Over time, things change. Your life changes, your family changes, families grow, they shrink, your finances change, your health changes. So we recommend that you maintain that. All right. We have a maintenance program here that we're starting up this June. And it's an annual program. Everybody gets to come in. We get to review their documents. You get to review their documents on an annual basis. We get to review your situation on an annual basis. And if there are changes that need to be made, they're included as part of the maintenance program. If the power of attorney form changes, that's included. You don't have to pay anything extra for that, right? And the reason we do that is, certainly there's a fee attached, but it's not very large. But the reason we do that is we want to make sure that your plan continues to be integrated, because we want to avoid all the probate costs for you later, all right? And to ensure that we do that job properly for you, we will cap our fee if there is any probate at 1% of whatever that is, right? So the idea is we don't want to actually have to do anything with regards to probate. We want to make sure everything is done, right? So that's part of it. And you get some other benefits, a little perks, little gifts every so often, newsletters, invitations to social events, things like that. Okay. So when it comes to planning, right, it's all about making sure that you identify your plan, right? See what you have now. Think about what you have now. And then does it meet the goals that you have, right? If it does, you're all set. You're done. Thank you for coming, right? But if it doesn't, now that you kind of have a sense of some of the things that need to happen, some of the things you need to do to protect your stuff, right? Then it's time to sit down and have a conversation with us, right?
Mhm.
Conversation is completely free. I like to talk, but I especially like to listen. Okay, that's really more important.
He does.
Okay, because when I listen, then I can make recommendations. Okay, and then we can talk. Okay, and then we make recommendations and decide you want to proceed. Fine. You don't want to proceed. That's fine too. Okay, totally fine. But you're going to walk away at least understanding what you need to do or what you can do. Okay. So when we talked about what the goals of the workshop, right? So most people want to know, can you protect your stuff? Yes, we can do that, right? I think we talked about the differences between revocable and irrevocable trusts, how we can avoid probate, right? Okay, and that's 2 and 3 go together, right? Do you have to give your stuff away to your kids, or should you give it away to your kids right now? No, we just explained that you shouldn't do that. Okay. If you give your stuff away, do you have to wait 60 months? I think we showed you don't have to do that. Okay. We talked about the differences between the powers of attorney, living will, and healthcare proxy, right? And how you can plan for disabled beneficiaries, right? That trust in the will or trust in your trust, right? A sub trust. IRAs, we didn't touch on that too much, but IRAs essentially, think about the concept, right? Anything you can save, spend, or give away without limitation is what? Susceptible to being taken.
Yeah.
Now, can you save, spend, or give away an IRA without limitation?
No.
No, there's limitations, right? Taxes,
Yeah.
when you can take it out, with age, right?
Yeah, never understand.
Because of that, IRAs have a different status. Okay, there is some special planning you have to do with the beneficiaries of who get them, right, upon your death. But as far as some of the things that we talked about, they're protected for a good amount of things. Okay, all right. So that's a good thing. And avoiding estate taxes. We didn't touch on the estate taxes too much, other than the thresholds. But remember, if you go back, remember we had that one trust that was completely closed.
Yes.
That plays into this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's where you deal with that. Okay. So did our time go quickly?
Excellent.
Yes. All right. Did you learn a lot?
Yes.
Anybody remember Paul Harvey? Paul Harvey. So Paul Harvey was a radio host. He had this little syndicated program all across the country. And it was like, he would essentially come on the radio and he would read a headline, that was in the news that week, right? It was like once a week I think he was on. And, basically how the headline was not the whole story, right? So he'd read the headline and then they'd go to commercial and he'd come back and then he would say, and now the rest of the story, right? And then he would go into some anecdote that had to do with the headline, right? To explain it. So that's what we did. I think we did the rest of the story, okay? And I hope the stories made you laugh, right? Okay, all right. So, I would appreciate it if you can. The evaluations that you have in packets, please fill those out. Like I said, my boss is very tough on me. But my wife and daughter, they're my bosses.
Yeah.
So, how do you protect your stuff? You have to act, right? Assess your needs. Okay. Create what's missing, right? So let's say you just have the power of attorney, right? So what else are you missing? You're missing a trust, you're missing a living will, you're missing other things, right? And tie it all in. That's the integration. Okay. All right. And when you come in, right, we call that our vision meeting. All right. You come in, we will discuss your plan to the extent you have one, and we will put that into context with the stories and talk about what your goals are, and then come up with a plan for you that will fit the needs you want. And you'll usually walk away with 3 separate choices. Okay. All right. And they're going to be different depending on your circumstance. Okay. So I want to thank you. Right. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We have our New York Asset Protection podcast. So if you on any podcasting service, you can listen to some more of these fun stories and some more of the details. But we have some YouTube videos. There'll be some more coming up. So there'll be some more coming up soon. And I look forward to hopefully seeing all of you in my office so we can sit and have a conversation about your estate plan. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for attending. Thank you to everyone on Zoom. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
And don't worry, you're gonna be seeing me soon.
Well, I hope you came in a little late, so you missed a good part of it.
Well,
Well, the good news is, let me just shut this down. Okay. So the good news is this has been recorded, right? So